The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Centre Standardization webinar. My name is Alison Atkinson and I'm a Principal Moderator for City and Guilds Technical Qualifications. This is a generic module which precedes the subject-specific webinars where you are given the opportunity to carry out marking and check the benchmark standard of the Synoptic Assignment. This is a recording, so if any questions arise, please keep a note of them and direct them to the Technical Moderation Support Team, and I'll give you details of those later on in the presentation. So today I shall provide an overview of a typical City and Guilds Technical Synoptic Assignment. In this case, it's a hair and beauty one, but we'll keep the advice to generic content only. We'll explain the requirements for evidence submission, both for marking in your centre and onto the moderation portal, and discuss the process of marking synoptic assessments using City and Guilds documents and describe your role within that process. We'll go through some best practice for centre standardisation before we then move on to the key milestones and timeline for 2017-18. The Synoptic Assignment Pack is issued to centres in September-October of each academic year. The tasks are set to assess a range of knowledge, understanding and skills across the qualification and are not unit specific. There must be sufficient time set aside for teaching the whole scope of content before assessment takes place. This is why an assessment window is set towards the end of each year of delivery. Here we will work through some of the key pages in the Synoptic Assignment. For this exercise, we've picked a hair and beauty one. However, you'll see that much of the information and guidance for candidates and centres is similar in any area. Obviously, the assignment brief and tasks are subject specific, so you may want to refer to an assignment in your own subject area as we go through. If you're listening to this recording in January 2018, I'd like to remind you to book onto the subject-specific webinars which are presented by the Principal Moderator in that area. City and Guilds will record these and they will be available in or around February. So at the start of the document we can see there's general guidance for candidates. This, with the assignment brief, is issued to candidates in this example 4 weeks before the tasks. It gives information on plagiarism, timings, health and safety and how to present their work. Much of this guidance is there to back up what you have already taught, such as they must submit good quality work which accurately shows their knowledge and skills. They must write things clearly and explain their concepts well. The advice on plagiarism should not be a surprise to candidates. They should know that any research sources must be referenced and the wording of others should not be copied and used as their own. So here we have a typical assignment brief. This brief is different to the set of tasks in that it can be issued to candidates before they see the exact detail of those tasks. This is to give them sufficient time to carry out the research they need. It must be noted that candidates must be taught the full range of content in the qualification handbook and not solely the area that they will be assessed on. The example we see here asks candidates to research the ancient Greek era, but in the handbook it's seen that they are taught a range of historical eras. They would then use their research skills and knowledge of the taught content to formulate the responses to the tasks. More guidance should be sought from the subject-specific qualification handbook. But as you can see here, this just sets the context for the tasks that follow. So these candidates are working on Saturdays in a local hair and beauty salon. They're asked to look into an ancient Greek theme and produce. They will be asked to produce some research notes on hair and beauty looks and also technological changes that have happened since that era to the present day. Then on day one, on day one of the assessment, they're given their set of tasks. Guidance and instructions in the pack are discussed in the centre with your candidates before they start. It's important to stress here that candidates should be talked through each of the tasks and be fully conversant in the demands of each before they begin. Each of the tasks show candidates what they must produce for marking, along with any conditions of the assessment, such as can they bring in research notes, for example. So as you can see here, this is what they must produce. And this is a plan which contains this information. It leads them into tasks 2 and 3, and these are the conditions of that particular task, and then this is what they must produce for marking. So in this case it's a plan including annotated images that support their information and also a bibliography. So moving on to task instructions for centres, this precedes the generic centre guidance and is specific to each set of tasks. It details instructions on resources, timings and rules set out for the tasks. So as you can see here, we've got resources. We've got specific guidance for task 2, and in this case we're asking candidates to use Appendix 1, and that is a document which enables them to report on their practical activity. Candidates should be given the brief 4 weeks before the task, and they have up to 13 hours to carry out those tasks, and it is broken down even further later on in the document. Centre guidance seen here is more generic and gives guidance to centres on how to prepare candidates, compliance, health and safety and minimum evidence requirements. It's important to note here that the Synoptic Assessment Pack should not be read in isolation. The additional documents listed here must be read alongside this. Marking and moderation and teaching, learning and assessment documents can all be found on the technicals pages of the website. As you will see in the assessment pack, a lot of guidance has been provided on how to observe candidates carrying out their practical performances. This is because the assessment method used for technicals is very different to typical VRQs or MVQs. Instead of deciding whether a candidate has achieved the required standard, so making a binary decision, yes or no, we now have to decide how well a candidate has performed and give a descriptive enough notes to enable detailed marking on a scale of 0 to 60, for example. So there's no more tick boxes. We'll look into a practical observation form later on in the presentation, but I would suggest that this area, itemised here on this slide, is one of the areas you may want to concentrate on when carrying out familiarisation activities in your centre. So this is an overview of those key areas in the assessment pack. We have the general guidance, etc. This and the assignment brief. Both of these are issued to candidates, in this case 4 weeks before they see the tasks. Then we have the tasks issued on the first day of the planned assessment. Those task instructions for centres, which gives detailed instructions on the resources, timings and rules. We then have generic centre guidance. And then we have the marking grid and some appendices that may be contained at the back of the document. Must be noted here that the marking grid is specific to each qualification because it gives examples of how candidates might show their knowledge, understanding and skills in that particular set of tasks. So they are written specifically for those those particular assessments, and they tend to change. Those examples might change year on year. So don't fall into the trap of using the same one every year or the same one that you think might cover different qualifications, because it doesn't. Moving on to evidence. Evidence is a general term which is used for everything submitted to show the candidate's set of knowledge, understanding and skills. The centre and the candidate are responsible for creating evidence. This is what the candidate submits, first of all, to you as evidence before, so that you can mark it. We've given an example of the types of things they might be asked to do in those set of tasks. So it guides them as to what they must produce. So we've got some things here such as planning or proposal documents, annotated images, bibliographies, written accounts of practical activities, photographs which also support that practical activity, and then perhaps some review and evaluation documents. Obviously, each of these requirements will be different for each qualification, and as I said earlier, they may change from one year to the next. So careful adherence to those tasks and what must be produced is an important note. So this is an example of the evidence that the centre must prepare for their submission for their sample onto the moderation portal. The production and upload of evidence is a key part of the centre's responsibility. There are forms which must be uploaded with the candidate's evidence, and examples of these can be seen in the assessment packs. So we have here the Declaration of Authenticity. This document must be signed by the tutor and the learner, and this year it has a box to tick to identify whether the learner has received any additional support. The practical observation form forms a key part of the candidate evidence, but the tutor actually completes this. There are a range of practical observation forms available. You may find one in your assessment pack, and also there's a generic one available in the Centre Documents Library. Centres are allowed to edit this form if they'd like to make it more user-friendly, but actually this year we've done this for you. We've added more detail and prompts for each assessment objective, and this is to lessen the burden of flicking through the marking grid when you're standing observing people. The candidate record form, this is where the marker assigns their marks after submission of the full set of tasks. These forms go along with the candidate's evidence and are uploaded onto the portal into the individuals area. We'll take a closer look at some of those forms later on. But there are also mandatory forms which must be uploaded onto the centres area on the moderation platform, and those are the standardization declaration. This is where the centre staff confirm that they have carried out standardization activities. This webinar being one of those. And then the personal interest form, and this is uploaded if it's applicable. And that might be in the cases of where a member of staff is teaching a member of their family. Okay, so it should be noted here that these forms are required for moderation, and if the centre's marking is out of tolerance and a full remark is needed, all candidates' evidence will have to be uploaded onto the moderation portal. So it's a good idea to note that these three forms here should be contained in that additional upload. So just to be careful that that you don't just prepare the evidence and then think that that's it, because moderators may well ask for additional evidence. Okay, let's take a closer look at a worked example of the practical observation form. This one's looking at assessment objective number 1, which is knowledge and recall. We can see how easy it is here for candidates to display their knowledge or recall during a practical task. During practical activities, there should be many opportunities for them to show aspects of all the other assessment objectives as well. It's highly important that tutors observing practical tasks are able to bring the activity to life by their descriptions of how well candidates have performed. These notes will be used for marking and moderation purposes, and without these rich descriptions, it's difficult for the marker and moderator to see how marks can be awarded. Remember, it may be a different member of staff who carries out the marking in the centre to the one who observed the practical performances. It must be noted that each candidate is likely to carry out the same steps when doing a task, so a checklist of this information would not help differentiate between them. Last year we saw some centre staff creating their own paperwork, and often these were in fact checklists that, when rank ordering candidates in the end and are trying to assign marks, those checklists became impractical. Use the marking grid to help you to describe, but avoid copying just the wording without also explaining where or why you think that particular descriptor was appropriate for that particular candidate. So here we can see that the observer has considered there to be good recall of knowledge, demonstrated through a confident approach to the practical task. Health and safety was adhered to, hair tests were carried out, they were carried out appropriately, the student was able to explain the appropriate choice of products for the hair type, suitable equipment was chosen for both hair and makeup. So as you can see, this candidate has shown some good aspects of her knowledge during the practical activity. The candidate record form, we've got a worked example here, and you will find that there's also a specific worked example in the sample standardization materials, which will be sent prior to your subject-specific webinar. This form is an important document which enables the moderator to see how, where or why marks have been awarded. The candidate record form is looked at in more depth during the subject-specific webinars, as we thought this material would make more sense to you if you were familiar with the content. But basically, this form is a summary document which specifies marks and justifications of the full set of tasks. It's a summary of all 3 tasks in this case, so should not merely repeat what is written on the practical observation form. Last year we did see that some centres just took the practical observation form and put the same wording in all of these assessment objectives, but that made us think that perhaps you weren't considering the other tasks like the planning document or the evaluation document. So it's important that this is a holistic viewpoint of all of the set of the tasks. Those of you that delivered last year will see that there's a change to this document. The shaded areas across the top here show the bands, so band 1, 2 and 3, and the marks have been placed here to help you as well. So it's important to say that again this is for this particular subject, this particular assessment, and so don't fall into the trap of using these for all of your different qualifications that you deliver, because the weightings within all of these assessment objectives will be different for each qualification. It's important to note here that marks should be awarded in each assessment objective and then totalled very carefully. Last year we saw some miscalculations which resulted in work appearing like it was marked incorrectly. So as you can see here, you place your marks here, so 7, 12, 7, 12 and 7, and then you total it up here, and we've got total there of 45. So to summarise, here are the candidate and cohort documents that will be submitted as part of your sample and uploaded onto the moderation portal. Examples of some of these documents are seen in the marking materials as part of the subject-specific webinar, but please note that all of the documents are actually available on the technicals area of the website. Many of these documents are in Word format, making it easy for you to download and complete as electronic versions, saving you the job of printing, completing by hand and then scanning. If, however, you do decide to handwrite on these documents, please ensure that you complete it in pen, and once scanned, the document is still legible. So as you can see here, we have candidate evidence, candidate record form, declaration of authenticity, their actual work that they've submitted, and then a practical observation form, and then the cohort evidence, which is placed on the centre area of the moderation portal, which is the centre standardization declaration, and also a personal interest form if that is applicable. Many of our technical qualifications have a requirement to upload photographic evidence. This is to supplement the practical activity and to help bring the performance to life. Remember, this evidence will be viewed remotely, so should represent the quality of the individual's performance and should accurately display the results of the activity. Excuse me. Additional information can be found in the requirements for uploading evidence document found on the TechBack pages of the website. But as an overview, we should note that photographs should be easily matched to the correct candidate. They should be clear, well lit, and show the areas of particular interest in sufficient detail for assessment. The backgrounds must be clear. Make sure that the colour of the background doesn't hamper the clarity of the image that's in the foreground. and also that the background isn't too busy. Photographs must be checked during or after upload. The moderator may need to expand the image and clarity could be lost. So for example, if a candidate has taken a photograph on a smartphone and it looked pretty clear on that small screen, remember that moderators may have to zoom into that image and that clarity may be lost. So it's a good idea to have a good old zoom in on your photographs to just check that the particular areas of interest are still quite clear when you've zoomed in. Photographs must be in colour, in particular when colour is part of the assessment, for example in hairdressing. You may want to encourage your candidates to annotate their photos, as this may give them further opportunity to show their knowledge or understanding. So in their explanation of what's actually in the image, they may be able to show in that explanation that they've got additional skills. And finally, please ensure that file sizes are not too large and that they're compatible with Windows and Mac, for example PDFs or JPEGs. That guidance document, the requirements for uploading evidence document, will give you those file sizes and some additional information, so it's a good idea to have a look at that before you start. So we found last year that some centres didn't label their evidence very effectively, and so we've given you some advice here, and again that advice is in that document that I've just referred to. So I've given you an example here of how we'd like to see the evidence labelled. We should see the name, the task number and a short description of what that task is. This is to enable moderators to do their job effectively. So this example here is the name of the candidate. We've got task 1, which is a planning document, task 2, practical activity, and task 3, evaluation. If at all possible, it would be really good if you could compress the file of all of these 3 tasks into one PDF and upload it into that individual's area on the moderation portal. That is so that there's some sort of coherence to the moderation activity. Last year we found that some moderators were having to open and close documents that didn't have names on them, and it became quite cumbersome for them to do that. You'll also find that it helps you to collate the evidence in a coherent way, and you can keep track of where your candidates are during that the production of their evidence. So it actually helps all of us if we can do these things that are itemised on this slide. Just to say again that the centre documents belong in a central file on the portal and don't go onto the individual's area. So those documents, the standardization documents for example, will need to go on that central file. We're now going to take a closer look at the marking grid. You might want to refer to your own specific marking grid, as the examples given in this one are for hair and beauty. This said, there are always generic band descriptors in the blue boxes, which we can see here. Centre markers and observers need to be familiar with this document. They should review it in advance of the practical and use it for formative assessments throughout the course. The marking grid is an easy-to-use assessment tool, and once you're familiar with it, it becomes a very effective way of determining marks and differentiating between candidates. So as we can see here, in column 1, we have the percentage weighting assigned to each assessment objective. These have been set by industry experts and are not expected to change throughout the life of the qualification. So you can see here the weight that's been placed on the understanding assessment objective is 25% of the marks. So for this particular qualification, we consider that understanding is a very important assessment objective. Column 2 shows that particular assessment objective, and in this case, understanding. We have another 4 assessment objectives. Those are knowledge, practical skills, bringing it all together, and attention to detail. And those of you that delivered last year will note in some qualifications we had 8 assessment objectives. We now only have 5. There are a range of questions posed here to act as prompts to focus your mind on how a candidate might show their skill. So here we've got, does the candidate make connections and show causal links and explain why? How well theories and concepts are applied to new situations? how well chosen are exemplars, how well do they illustrate the concept. So it's starting to channel your mind in what we consider understanding to be. Across the top here, we see the band descriptors, a very limited sort of band descriptor here, so poor to limited, fair to good, and strong to excellent. So it's starting to channel your thoughts into where this particular evidence lies. And then we've got the marks here for this particular qualification. So in this instance, we've got 0 to 5, 6 to 10, and 11 to 15. We're still in the blue shaded areas here, so we know that this is still generic explanations or descriptions of what understanding is. So we've got here in band descriptor 1, we've got some things that might help us to determine whether the evidence is in fact in band 1. Misunderstanding, illogical connections and guessing. Then moving up to band 2, we've got logical, slightly disjointed or plausible. And then in band 3, we've got logical reasoning, thoughtful decisions, causal links, justified. So again, this is just sort of channeling our thoughts into where a candidate might be positioned. But examples of the understanding expected for the particular qualification and those set of tasks, then they're itemised down here. So in this case, comparisons of hair and beauty between different eras, justification for cosmetics used against the brief, importance of using imagery in business, how design ideas are presented, etc. So your band descriptors specific to the qualification here are itemised in green. Okay. So it's important to remember here that the bands don't relate to pass, merit and distinction, as the grade boundaries have not been set for this year. Another point is that the whole of the band is considered. Don't fall into the trap of just assigning marks at the top or the bottom of the band. This is a sliding scale, and there are also marks in the middle of bands. Another area we see a mistake sometimes is to imagine that because a candidate has shown commercial competency, they're given 100% of the marks. But this would be ignoring the fact that some candidates can do better than others, and can also show strengths and weaknesses in different assessment objectives. Okay, moving on. This is the internal, some examples of some activities for internal standardization. It's a list of some suggested activities, and this will, by carrying out some of these things in your centre, it will help you to align your judgments and become familiar with the new technicals. So if we just go through a few of those, discussing and familiarising yourself with the talk content found in the qualification handbook is a really good way of pitching the level of expectation of that assessment itself. Obviously reading, as I said earlier, reading the documents that are supplied as guidance for you, so the marking and moderation guide, for example. Reading the whole synoptic assignment and discussing ways that candidates might generate evidence is a really good way of starting to come to terms with what those expectation levels are. Discussing and practicing holistic marking, because some of us aren't used to doing that. If we've marked specific tasks in isolation before for VRQs, we might have graded things as specific tasks. For MVQs, we might have used tick boxes, so we've used a sort of binary assessment model. But holistic marking takes into account all of those tasks and kind of it's getting a feel for what the candidate has produced overall. Rank ordering candidates' work is a really good way of deciding where the standards lie within your centre markers and your centre observers, because by saying that one candidate is better than another candidate is actually a good sort of starting point to those discussions. Comparing judgments in bands, comparing marks and descriptive comments on practical observation forms is a really good way of deciding whether those comments on those forms are enough to enable somebody to mark that form. So perhaps a good idea would be to, during a practical activity, give an observer a practical observation form and say, I'd like you to describe that one candidate in those assessment objectives, and then give that form to somebody else for them to try and assign marks using the marking grid. That might be quite a good way of getting them used to assigning their judgments according to the band descriptors, but then also that marker to assign marks using that form. And finally, referring to the talk content found in the Qualification Handbook, you have to consider that if you've not taught it or facilitated research in it, then how can you expect it to show up in candidates' work? And I know that this is sometimes a trap that I fall into. As a subject expert, you consider that some candidates must know things almost by osmosis, but you have to remember that if you've not taught it, then it's likely that they don't actually know it. So don't just say that because candidates have missed things out that they shouldn't be given very good marks, that you should always refer back to what has been taught in those topics in each of the units. So who should take part in these activities? I would say that everybody that touches the qualification, that would be tutors, delivery staff, assessors, observers, markers and centre IQAs. Additionally to that, if you do invite industry experts in, then it's a good idea for them to take part in some of these activities too. Okay, so hopefully the information we've given will help you in your assessment of technical qualifications. The subject-specific part of this training is available for those of you who have completed this aspect today, so please ensure that you've booked onto this or that you can access it through the website if it's later on in the year. To move on, this checklist is available to you on the City and Guilds website. Please use it and tick off each box when the activity is complete. Technical qualifications have quite different timelines to VRQs, so don't be caught out. We're now in January and we can see the booking window opens for the online multiple choice questions in Land, along with a Synoptic Assignment release date for Land qualifications. On the 5th of February, the Synoptic Assignment can be released for all learners. And as you can see, these tick boxes will help you to check off here, there, and there, to check off whether that has actually been carried out throughout the year. On this next slide, we must note that the last date for booking the summer series of external exams is the 27th of April. There it is, 27th of April, and that May the 18th is the deadline for uploading Synoptic Assignment evidence onto the moderation portal. June the 15th is for those optional or additional units, the centre assessed components. So it's important that although some of you may be going on into July in your delivery, that you have set aside enough time for candidates to complete their assignments and then for you to mark it and then carry out some standardization activities. And by the 18th of May for the Synoptic, you've actually placed it on the evidence for the sample that you need onto that moderation portal. Okay, so we've got some support and resources here. These are links, so you can actually push on those buttons to get you straight through to those specific areas on the web page. City and Guilds website tech back pages give lots of information, lots of those guidance documents that I referred to earlier. So that's a really important area on the website for you to access, along with your specific subject area page as well. The Technicals and Moderation Support Team, that's their email address there and their telephone number there. Okay, I'd like to thank you for your time and I hope this has been useful to you. Any questions again should be directed to the Moderation Support Team, but I'd like to wish you a very good day.